Do you have a guilty pleasure of a movie? One that you know isn't perfect, maybe it's a bit outdated, it might not even be your favourite, but regardless, something about it stuck with you. You'll always campaign for it, show it to your friends, and you still love it to this day. I have a few myself, but the biggest of all would have to be Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. Coming from my all-time favourite director, it was the first theatrical film he directed. It's also probably his weakest film in many aspects, and most likely his own least favourite film that he's directed. It doesn't quite have the cultural impact of films such as My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away. It doesn't feature original characters, instead being a movie tie-in, and the second one at that, to a pre-existing franchise. There's no Joe Hisaishi score, nor world-renowned Studio Ghibli to back up its name, leaving it forgotten by many Ghibli fans. There aren't even many of Miyazaki's well-known themes, such as animism and anti-war sentiments that appear in almost every other film of his. Despite all of this, Cagliostro is still a simple, genuine, and entertaining masterpiece of a directorial debut. One of the most influential films in the animation industry, and for my own personal life. For those who aren't familiar with the franchise, Lupin III is a classic anime series that debuted in 1969 and is based on the manga of the same name by Kazuhiko Kato, aka Monkey Punch. It stars the titular grandson of the famous fictional French thief Arsène Lupin from Maurice Leblanc's original short stories. The plots typically follow his many heists of his gang, consisting of Daisuke Jigen, a gunslinger who never misses his mark, Goemon Ishikawa XIII, a samurai and descendant of the legendary Japanese outlaw by the same name, and Lupin's on-again, off-again lover and femme fatale Fujiko Mine, all while they're either being pursued by Lupin's comedic but hard-working nemesis Inspector Zenigata from Interpol, or facing off against even more dastardly villains. It's a globe-trotting series that's been going on since the 70s in some form or another, either TV series, animated specials, or theatrical movies. Some people, including myself, liken it to a Japanese Scooby-Doo in some ways. It keeps the same formula but has been around for ages. It has a lot of diversity tone-wise, from lighthearted fun to more serious adult character studies. It's a series that most people have at least heard of or seen something from its extended catalogue. It's always been there in the back, sometimes ignored or overlooked. Its legacy and influence cannot be undermined. Like most people, The Castle of Cagliostro was my introduction to the Lupin III franchise. Here's a little story on how I found the film for the first time. It was back in the beginning of 2019, I was about to start my final year of high school, and I had gradually worked my way through the Miyazaki films over the years. Laputa, Totoro, and Spirited Away being my first ventures into the Ghibli library. By 2019, I had only had 2 Miyazaki films left, and his 2 oldest at that. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and The Castle of Cagliostro. I don't know why I left these 2 until last, specifically, but I think it might have been an inner stigma against the older animation. I probably assumed that they were of lower quality, because they were released earlier, and I hadn't heard of many other anime films from around that time, so I figured they must not have found their footing yet, quality-wise. I was worried they wouldn't live up to the level of imagination and mysticism set by some of his later films, which are more acclaimed, and that these older films would perhaps be disappointing in comparison. My only knowledge prior to seeing the film was a video ranking Miyazaki's 11 films. Cagliostro sat around the middle, and didn't stick out to me when I saw that video back in 2015 or so. I just thought it was a basic heist and action movie starring 2 generic characters. But back to that night in early 2019, I found Cagliostro on Netflix and decided, what the heck, I guess I'll watch it. It's Miyazaki, it surely can't be bad. So I put it on the little camping TV I was using as a second monitor in my bedroom, and from a few meters away in my bed, watched the film in the dark with some popcorn. What proceeded was 100 minutes that absolutely blew my expectations away. By the opening credits alone, I was sold on the film. My doubts had been erased. And by the famous chase scene, it was already becoming one of my favourite films. By the end, I was in shock at what I had seen, and Lupin III had completely stolen my heart. I didn't know that Lupin III was a pre-existing franchise at the time, but I was amazed at how I was sold on the group of characters, the premise of the series, the iconic soundtrack by Yuji Ono, and the dynamic between Lupin and Zenigata in such a short time. After watching Cagliostro, I searched for more discussion about the film online, and found out about one of the most influential series in all of animation. I needed to see more of it, so I did. Throughout the years since, I've seen its earlier roots in the original pilot in Part 1, to the more modern Cagliostro-inspired CGI movie Lupin III the First, and the recent Lupin Zero miniseries. Needless to say, since that fateful night in 2019, Lupin III has become one of my favourite franchises, and has been a big influence on my own art style and my music tastes. I haven't seen all of it, but I have seen quite a lot. I've enjoyed what I've seen, and it's very close to my heart. It's safe to say that The Castle Cagliostro is one of my favourite films, and yes, while I do like some other films more profoundly, such as Princess Mononoke, Porco Rosso, Mirai, and Whisper of the Heart, which are all films I consider as better in many ways, Cagliostro is definitely my guilty pleasure. Out of all of the aforementioned, it's the one I've seen the most and shown to the most people. I even imported the complete storyboards, which I've read a few times and studied for storyboarding practice and developing my art. It even includes a short guide from Miyazaki at the back, about what all of his notes and iconography means, which is really cute and I appreciate it. I mean, you know you love a movie when you've read it. And yes, it is a flawed film, definitely. Clarice and the Counts have hardly any character as the damsel in distress and main antagonist. The pacing does grind to a halt at the end of the third act because yes, it's technically a 4-act story, and at times some of the background's animation can be a bit mediocre. But most of these points are excusable because this movie is straight up insane. It was the first feature-length film that Miyazaki directed, wrote, and storyboarded, and on top of that, it only had 7 months of production time. He started storyboarding in May of 1979. Animation began in July when he was only a third of the way through the storyboards, and then production finished in November of that same year. It's a miracle that the movie was even finished in time. For comparison, in my third year of university, we spent about the exact same time period, July to November, producing a 3-minute film, and we barely survived. On top of finishing the film, it's also really good. There's a reason it's the gateway to the franchise for almost everybody, because despite being the second Lupin III film, it's easily one of the best in the series. Okay, so I've gone over a bit of the history behind the production of Cagliostro. Now I'm going to do what I really wanted to do with this video, which is gush about the movie. The animation is insanely good for underpaid and overworked 1970s standards, and holds up really well to this day. The atmosphere for the film is superb and creepy. This is created through the backgrounds of this old gothic castle, the eerie kind of dated but unique sound effects, and the incredible soundtrack by Yuji Ono, one of my personal favourite composers, ranging from fun, fast-paced jazz to more slow and emotional pieces. From a storyboarding and cinematic angle, there are countless memorable shots and every scene sticks with you. Some of my favourite shots include Lupin climbing up the castle roof, Lupin leaping to the tower with perfect sound design and comedic timing, the Fiat 500 racing up the cliff, Lupin hiding from Zenigata and the aqueduct statue, the spaghetti, which was the original aesthetically pleasing Ghibli food, and every shot from the opening credits. Can I talk about the opening credits for a second, which, by the way, are amazing thanks in part to the song Fire Treasure, has a very comfortable and nostalgic feeling to it as Lupin and Jigen camp their way to Cagliostro, almost like a sleepy summer's evening. Everything aesthetically about Cagliostro is already so memorable and just sticks with you. Part of this is of course thanks to Miyazaki, but credit absolutely has to go to Yuji Ono and Yasuo Otsuka as well, who both played a large part in Cagliostro and the franchise as a whole. Ono has been the composer for all the Lupin III franchise since Part 2, save a few exceptions. And Yasuo Otsuka was the original art director for the series, and was actually one of Miyazaki and Isao Takahata's mentors. Considering how influential they are in the animation world, should tell you plenty about how much credit Otsuka deserves. In Cagliostro, he also gave Lupin his iconic Fiat 500, in one of the best chase scenes put to screen, just because he had one in real life. I love that little fact. Story-wise, Miyazaki did a tremendous job. He created an iconic plot for the franchise which draws you in with its mysteries, it has tight-paced action, and even has its magical moments that become a lot more common in his later movies. I mean, he handed in the first draft for the scenario of the film, and he got no notes. Part of it was probably because of how tight the production schedule was, but it's still crazy that Miyazaki has been such an effective storyteller right from the very beginning. It is such a joy to watch all around, and it is definitely a Miyazaki movie through and through. But also as an introduction to the series, it really works great. Despite not being his original creations, he makes the Lupin gang his own, and makes it abundantly clear who they are. From the very first shot of the film, you get an understanding of what and who these characters are. Lupin and Jigen, having just robbed a casino in Monaco, climb down the side of it with bags of money, and when the alarms go off, they get away effortlessly in a comedic and light tone. Out of all of them, Goemon probably gets the least focus, and Jigen disappears mainly right after the beginning of the second act. Fujiko is also quite different visually and personality-wise from her other appearances, being more action-focused like some other Ghibli women, and having seemingly matured and moved on from Lupin. However, the two that get the most shine are absolutely Lupin and Zenigata. Lupin is much more of a Robin Hood-like hero, he's very kind-hearted, and unlike how he is in most other Lupin media, which can be a detriment to some, and this portrayal is considered the most controversial aspect of the film amongst Lupin fans. But I'm personally fine with it. I always just envision this as taking place later in his career when he's matured more. And just like me, Zenigata is Miyazaki's favourite character. Ever since he was animating on part 1, it was clear that he liked Zenigata the most. He went out of his way animating him, giving him so much life and character, and he steals the show on Cagliostro. Every scene where these two are on screen is peak early Miyazaki action and comedy. In addition, the titular castle works as an amazing setting for a heist and mystery. When writing the story, Miyazaki tried to revisit every location at least once as a challenge to himself. So with the characters running all over the place from courtyards to sewers to dungeons and rooftops, the castle feels very big, but you never feel lost, and you start to learn the layout of it yourself. Almost like you're there, which makes the film surprisingly immersive. I could go on and on about Miyazaki's interpretation of Lupin, but I'll leave it here for today. If you want to learn more about it or his involvement in the series from part 1 with Takahata, I'd recommend Miyazaki's Lupin by Infinite Snow Productions on YouTube. It's a really great video and even has a whole segment on how Miyazaki was a Zenigata fanboy, which had me grinning from ear to ear when it came on. And I have mentioned a few bits about the plot, but I'll also leave that for now, and won't go into more detail, just because I believe this is a film worth going into as spoiler-free as possible. Just enjoy it for how it is, and you'll probably really appreciate it, just like I did. Despite being a bit of a cult classic, Cagliostro and the Lupin III series has been incredibly influential for not only the anime industry, but much of the global film industry as well. For the Lupin franchise, aside from making the Fiat 500 a series staple, the film is referenced all the time fondly, and some specials and movies have a similar feel. For example, the first is structured quite similar to Cagliostro, and is probably the closest to it tone and character-wise. And even the heist in Farewells of Nostradamus reminds me of the second act in Cagliostro, with Lupin and Jigen trying to break into the daunting skyscraper. Lupin III was one of the first anime targeted towards adults, and because Miyazaki and Takahata made it successful, it paved the way for more adult anime after it. Not to mention, having it be Miyazaki's successful theatrical debut would have helped cement him and Studio Ghibli in the industry. I mean, can you imagine the anime industry without Ghibli? Aside from just Takahata and Miyazaki, many other large names in the anime industry got their start on a Lupin project, or have been inspired by it in some way because of just how long it's been around. Beyond Japan, the film has been influential in the Western animation industry as well. The obvious one is with Disney's The Great Mouse Detective, with its climax paying direct homage to the clock tower fight in Cagliostro. And apparently Woody from Toy Story's design is based on Lupin, according to IMDb. What? There was also the classic rumour of Spielberg being inspired by the film to make Indiana Jones. Although this has never been confirmed, it is made a little more convincing by the fact that the arcade game Cliffhanger, which took footage from Cagliostro and The Mystery of Marmo, appears in The Goonies, which Spielberg did a story for. On another note, a more controversial influence for the film had come in the form of the character Clarice, who is the damsel in distress for the film. She doesn't have much character, but she is cute and fills her role fine. That's where the problem came. Much to the begrudgment of Miyazaki, Clarice is one of the earlier examples of a moe character that people became obsessed with, and eventually evolved into the waifu culture that we have today, for better or for worse. Yup, Mr. Hayao Anime was a mistake Miyazaki is responsible for waifus. And that's only a few examples without even touching how popular the series is in places like Italy. So even if you haven't seen or heard of Cagliostro or Lupin III, you've most likely been exposed to a reference to it or seen something inspired by it, which I think is very cool. After all this, I believe I can say without a doubt that Lupin III, the Castle of Cagliostro, isn't just a guilty pleasure for myself, but a genuine pleasure and a delight. There's nothing to feel guilty about liking it, rather ironic since it is about a thief. So, if you've listened to me babble on about this movie until now, the biggest takeaway I would say is to watch The Castle Cagliostro. And if you've already seen it, watch it again, because I'm sure you'll spot a new detail you hadn't noticed before. I always show this film to friends who've never seen it whenever the chance arises, and they've never once been disappointed. If you're an animation or Ghibli fan, Cagliostro is an essential must-watch, for not only the history it plays in the studio's start, but also its impact on the medium of animation as well. I promise, you won't regret it.
Hello, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. I spent a lot of time working on it, and I also had a lot of fun working on it, so I hope you enjoyed it as well. And if you've seen Cagliostro, or if you plan on watching it, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it, or what your favourite part is. If you really enjoyed this video and want to see more, please consider subscribing. I plan on doing a lot more videos like this, and looking forward to making them, so if you enjoyed it, then stick around. Alright, thank you, bye.